Okay, so the last thing we're going to talk about in the early medieval Europe before we get into Romanesque and then Gothic is the Ottonian Empire. Ottonian is not the same as the Ottoman Empire. I've had people be confused about that in the past, so this is a different thing, okay? So Charlemagne dies in 814 after he rules for 46 years. His son, Louis the Pious, succeeds him, but he dies pretty quickly. He dies in 840. Then Charles the Bald, Lothair, and Louis the German divide the empire. So divide what was the Holy Roman Empire between them. So France, Germany, and the region from the Netherlands and Belgium, kind of all of that all the way down to Rome. This division weakens the Carolingian Empire and it eventually falls. It's then consolidated under the rule of one Saxon line of German emperors, and those are the Ottonians. So they're called the Ottonians because the first guy in their line is named Otto. So Otto is crowned by the Pope in 962. He cements ties with Italy and the papacy and with the Byzantine Empire. And the architecture follows the Carolingian standards that were set under Charlemagne's rule. But it also introduces some new elements as well. So let's take a peek. Maybe. There we go. Okay. So this is in Genrode, Germany. This is St. Cyriacus, and it's built between 961 and 973. Inside we have an alternating support system, which means columns, round cylindrical columns, alternate with heavy piers. So you can see this is the interior. We don't have a vaulted roof. We have a straight across timber roof. We do have a colonnade on the second floor for the clerestory. We've got the nave that goes down to the apse with aisles on either side, so very much in keeping with the basilican plan. But down along either side of the nave, we have this alternating support system, column, pier, with round arches in between. So this is something that we see, this alternating support system is pretty common. And if we go back, you can see that the westwork is in place at the front of this church as well. So we have our two towers in the front for that westwork, which is the Carolingian influence. Let's look at some other examples. So this is in Hildesheim, Germany. This is St. Michael's. And Bishop Bernard was a big patron of the arts, of Ottonian art and architecture. He was the bishop of this church, and he wanted to turn St. Michael's into kind of a center for learning. So he himself was an artist. He was a bronze caster and craftsman, so he was a sculptor. And St. Michael's has this kind of unique plan for the time. It has a double transept plan. So it has 6 towers. It has the westwork towers, and then it also has towers on the transept. Inside we have an alternating support system, just like what we saw at St. Cyriacus. And the crossing squares is the basis for all of the dimensions in the nave. Lots of sculpture and painting happening here because he wanted it to be kind of an art center. So when we look at its timbered ceiling, it is all completely painted, which is interesting because we've mostly seen mosaic work on ceilings in the same kind of era in the Byzantine. So this is a little bit of a different style and a little different look. We have an alternating support system that's a little bit different. We have column, pier, column, pier. We still have the apse at the back, the nave with the aisles on either side, so a basilican plan, though there is a double transept here, so it's a little bit different. And you'll notice we have the kind of orange and white alternating stone, which is very much an influence from the Umayyad Caliphate in Moorish Islamic Spain. So we have a lot of interesting things happening here. Another really significant aspect of this particular church are the doors. So they are commissioned by the bishop, Bishop Bernward, who was a bronze caster, so it makes sense that we have these huge bronze doors. They're created in 1015. They're 15.5 feet high, so very tall. Each of these doors is cast in a single piece, which is insane to me because they're 15.5 feet high, so that's a ton of bronze. That's huge. Usually with doors like this, they're cast in sections and then set together in the door, but these were cast in a single piece for each door, which is crazy pants. That's a marvel. That's just, wow, I can't even think about how heavy these things are. The left door shows the story of Genesis, which is it shows the creation of Eve through the murder of Abel. The right door is the life of Christ. I actually think I have a slide for this. I do. Is the life of Christ, which is the Annunciation, where the angel comes and tells Mary that she's going to give birth to the Son of God, all the way to Noli me tangere, which means it's the scene where Christ is resurrected and he appears to Mary Magdalene and she tries to touch him to see if he's real, and he says, "Don't touch me." Noli me tangere means do not touch me, because he's not risen up into heaven to be at the side of his Father. Anyway, so from his conception all the way to his resurrection. Okay, together, these two doors, we have the story of original sin on one side, and then we have the story of the redemption of man on the other side, right? Because man is redeemed through Christ's sacrifice, da da da. Okay. All right, so these are pretty monumental things, and we see a return to this interest in narrative. We also see a return to an interest in relief sculpture that is cast. You'll notice there's some attention to things here, like we have higher relief for the figures in the foreground and lower relief in the background, which is a nod to ideas about atmospheric perspective that we saw in classical relief sculpture. Okay, so we also have the Magdeburg ivories. These have been split up over time, which is kind of a bummer. They're narrative relief sculptures carved out of ivory. 16 of them still exist. There used to be 50, and they were all created to decorate an altar. They've been split up and sold to different parties over time, and a lot of them have been lost to history, which is sad. Okay, so in this image, this is a kind of image that I really like. This is, we have Otto the First. He's the little figure in the left holding the church, and he's presenting this cathedral to Christ. So I love these images where the patron has a little tiny version of the church building that they commissioned to be built, and they're offering it up to Christ or Mary or whomever. I don't know, something about it is really darling to me. So that's what's happening here. This exists now at the Met in New York. You can see it at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Here are a couple more of these panels. They're super interesting. So they're carved out of ivory. Ivory becomes popular again in this time period as a material. And what's interesting about these is they have such a similar look to me as our illuminated manuscripts from this time. So they're not super realistic. The folds in the clothing are kind of arbitrary. The figures are a little bit chunky, like a little kind of clunky and not super sophisticated in the way they're rendered. And then we have these kind of stylized backgrounds. I don't know, they're kind of fabulous. They're very interesting works. So at this church, the Magdeburg Church, the relics of Saint Maurice are here. He was a army commander. He was a Christian army commander who was in Africa. The Romans executed him in Gaul because he refused to sacrifice to the old gods. So he's martyred because of his Christian belief before Christianity was legal in the Roman Empire. Otto the First, the emperor, had his bones moved from France to Germany, specifically for this church. And so these ivories were the altarpiece for the church that held these relics. Okay. So Otto II marries Theophanu. She was a Byzantine princess, and this kind of secures this important alliance between the Byzantine Empire and the Holy Roman Ottonian Empire, which is kind of basically the new iteration of the Holy Roman Empire. They are married by the Pope in Rome. Otto I is married to Adelaide, who's the widow of the King of the Lombards in Italy, which extends his empire south of the Alps a long way. So these two things, these two marriages, really solidify the extend and expand the Holy Roman Empire. Otto II dies 10 years after his marriage. His son Otto III is only 3 and becomes the king. But it's Theophanu who rules as regent, and this is Theophanu. When she dies in 991, Adelaide becomes regent until Otto III is old enough. So we have a long period of time where the women of this family of the Ottonian Empire are ruling as regents. Theophanu influences art and architecture a lot. She redoes the Westwork at Saint Pantaleon, which becomes kind of exemplary of what Westwork is going to look like going forward into the Romanesque. Okay, this is the Gero crucifix. It's a freestanding sculpture, so we start seeing freestanding sculpture again, which we haven't really seen in quite a while. This becomes a popular kind of thing, particularly this type of sculpture. So we have a more similar view of Christ to what's happening in the Byzantine. So we have the suffering Christ becomes a figure in the Holy Roman Empire, much like we saw the suffering Christ in some of the works that we looked at in the late Byzantine particularly, and the kind of the late Middle Byzantine. We have more emotion on the face. And this is quite large. This is about 6'2", so it's about a human size, like a realistically sized human. And it is carved wood that is then painted. So we start seeing more of this kind of work becoming popular in churches. Manuscripts are also still an important part of artwork at this time. So this is the Gospel Book of Otto III. And we see, let's see here. Here's Otto III enthroned on the right. So this is him sitting on his throne, and on one side he has clergy members, on the other side he has barons. So it's showing him balancing between church and state because of this concept of the Holy Roman Empire. He has a globe in his hand to show that he is meant to be the ruler of all, the emperor of all. He moves the court back to Rome, and then he dies quite young. He dies at the age of 21, and he's moved back up and buried at the chapel at Aachen, where Charlemagne's court was. Okay. Oh, I had a close-up view of that, so there's that again. This is from the lectionary of Henry II. Henry II succeeds Otto III. His book is the most noteworthy art of his rule, so we can see a return to this very abstract kind of look that we saw in the Byzantine, where we have these solid gold backgrounds, really arbitrary folds in fabric, everything's very stylized. Shoulders look like they're dislocated. Nothing is very realistic or naturalistic any longer. So we had a brief moment during Charlemagne's court where there was more of an interest in this classical view of things that were more naturalistic, and then that's not a thing anymore. Okay. This is the Uda Codex. So Uda was the abbess, so she was like the head nun basically of an abbey. And this is her dedicating her codex to the Virgin. So she's the little nun figure at the bottom that's kind of looking up to the enthroned Virgin Mary and Christ. You can see Christ has his cruciform halo sitting on his mother's lap, and Mary is wearing a crown because she's the Queen of Heaven. Okay, so we have Uta, who's the abbess, holding, you notice she's holding up a book to Mary, and that's her kind of showing, I wrote and illustrated this codex, this holy book, and I'm here dedicating it to you and handing it to you. which I think is kind of sweet. Okay, so when we can look in the style here, we see that we have more of this kind of medieval style that's not particularly realistic or naturalistic, really arbitrary folds in the clothing. We have the gold background and all this illustrative work around it, so everything is very stylized, right? There's a close-up of Uda handing her book up to Mary. I don't know why, I just love these where the person is like holding up the church or the book or whatever it is and offering it to the holy person. It's like, they're kind of sweet, I don't know. Okay, so that is the end of the early medieval work that we're going to look at, and next we will get into the Romanesque. Okay.